Hello and welcome to UNLV Library's Gaming Research Colloquium. My name is Peter Michel, and today I am the Acting Director of UNLV's Center for Gaming Research. Our speaker today is Dr. Dorothy Barenscott. Dr. Barenscott is Assistant Professor of Modern and Contemporary Art History and Theory in the Department of Fine Arts in Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Vancouver, British Columbia. Her talk is entitled The Role of Art and Spatial Aesthetics in the Rebranding of Las Vegas. Dr. Barenscott.
Hello, thank you for coming. I understand it's the end of semester, so it's always nice to see some support for these talks, and I know that people go out of their way to come, so thank you. Before I begin my talk, I would like to take the opportunity to thank everyone at UNLV who has made my two-week visit as an Eadington Fellow both productive and very fruitful. Very special thanks to Sue Kim Chung, Peter Michel, Aaron Mays, Stephanie Evans, Clay T. White here at Spatial Collections and Archives, and a big thank you to Vice Provost Dave Schwartz, Robert Tracy in the Art Department, and Alicia Curlin with the Barrick Museum of Art. Your generosity in answering my questions and hospitality makes me wish I worked with all of you full-time. You are all very fortunate to be at this special institution, and I know I will be making future visits. So I want to begin by talking about how this project emerged. As an art historian focused on modern and contemporary art, this project has been a natural outgrowth of several areas of my own research and personal interests. Back during the completion of my dissertation at the University of British Columbia, I became very interested in theories and ideas concerning avant-garde art and non-traditional modes of art exhibition, looking closely for examples at immersive painted panoramas and early cinema, and the ways in which new audiences for art were being attracted through public engagement with new media and spatial formations. Here, the collapsing distinctions between high and low art especially intrigued me, and the invitation to a newness and modernity in seeing and being, which complemented liberal aims and the rising tide of urban cosmopolitanism in the early 20th century. Oops, sorry. There we go. At the same time, I have become increasingly intrigued with the contemporary art market and art collecting more generally, mostly because a good friend of mine from grad school with whom I completed my PhD had trained as an art advisor and professional art appraiser, and I too since have undertaken practice with her, or training with her, and we would have long discussions about the taboo topic of the art market in academia, and especially art schools, and the ways in which the art market has shaped art historical discourse. And I actually put up a reference to The Price of Everything, a recent HBO documentary that if you haven't seen, I encourage you to watch, which talks about sort of the increasing relevance of the art market and art collecting in the art world today. And then finally, there is Las Vegas itself, a place to which I've been traveling regularly since childhood and holds many cherished memories. My parents, both immigrants, my mother, who worked as a hotel executive, starting in housekeeping and ending as an executive at the Marriott Corporation, shaped my experience and understanding of hotel design, while my father, now a retired realtor with a keen interest in architecture and land development, helped me think about urban planning and space. All of these interests and influences magically converged in June 2013 when my husband and I were lucky enough to get a deal at the Wynn Encore Resort. As soon as we checked into our fabulous suite, I noted the abstract paintings on the walls, taking in the way the interior design matched the tones of the paintings. Later, as we moved through the hotel, I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw a Jeff Koons sculpture in the lobby, a sculpture that I knew was worth many millions of dollars and seemed completely out of place in the lobby of a hotel. As I later learned, SteveWynn had made news with the purchase of Koons tulips for $34 million in 2012 and immediately made the sculpture the hotel complex's centerpiece. Complete with a 24-hour guard to signal the value and importance of the work, the art object was positioned in the Wynn Theater Rotunda, where the Wynn and Encore hotels joined, along the same corridor as the exclusive high-end luxury goods stores. 2 years later, ironically coinciding with our next trip to Vegas, Wynn would once again raise art world eyebrows with the purchase of a second Koons sculpture, Popeye, purchased for $28 million and set to replace tulips once his next hotel project was complete in Asia. Now, for those of you that don't know, Jeff Koons is one of the world's most prolific contemporary artists and has built his practice uniting the pop art sensibilities and content of Andy Warhol with the epic scale of Renaissance sculpture. Importantly, he is also a total darling of the art market, fetching multiple millions at auction for all of his works, while most art critics and academics have dismissed him and his work for being too commercially based and pandering to fashion and celebrity. In many ways, Koons and Wynn are in perfect alignment in how they regard art. Dorothea von Hantelmann, in her 2009 essay, Why Koons?, describes Koons' ambitions as emanating from an art avant-garde ethos to, quote, redefine the function of art in society, to renew the social contract between art and society by opening art up to the function of differently structured and more widely conceived publics. She goes on to argue how Koons wants to rehabilitate the idea of art as an instrument for the self-empowerment of the bourgeois viewer, an idea that unites him, I would argue, very strongly with Wynn. Inclusion and populism inform both of their motivations, along with the desire to empower the viewer through secular archetypes like flowers, hearts, toys, and self-transforming figures like Popeye, all rendered in shiny surfaces that make it impossible to look at a work of art without seeing oneself. Both pictures of the Koons sculpture made it onto my Instagram feed. The Wynn resorts are, as we know, shamelessly Instagrammable, and this helped spark some great conversations with friends, colleagues, and students, and I ended up writing a conference paper on SteveWynn's collecting practices presented at Leeds University in the UK on the topic of art collecting, musing about the questions that lingered in my mind about what I knew existed between these art objects and a long legacy of Vegas as a site of artistic and spatial imagination. Indeed, back in 1972, when architects Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown traveled to Las Vegas to undertake what would become one of the boldest indictments of modernism, they dared to approach the built urban environment of the Las Vegas Strip on its own terms. Learning from Las Vegas became one of the most significant texts heralding the coming of the postmodernist turn, a book I immediately spotted in the reading room on the first day of my visit, and it is a treatise arguing for the need to reconsider the basis of thinking around the city and architecture as a relationship that responds to changes in the tactics and apprehension of media, and especially around new scales assumed by advertising in relation to architecture, cities, and landscapes. As Venturi and Brown summed up in their now famous quote, "Learning to really look at a place and question how we look is a way of becoming revolutionary." 2 decades later, in the 1990s, when businessman and casino developer SteveWynn began the wholesale transformation of the Las Vegas Strip, taking the casino hotel experience from gaudy, rudimentary, and transactional to elegant, immersive, and sensational, I argue he would undertake a similar re-envisioning of the city's landscape, gambling quite literally on the idea that the placement of his private art collection into the public spaces and design sensibilities of his hotels could revolutionize the Vegas experience. During my Eadington fellowship, I've been working to refine my analysis of Wynn's interest in promotion of art to the masses through an examination of the extended network of architects, designers, engineers, executives, and other creative individuals who helped manifest his vision and rebrand the Vegas gaming experience. At the same time, I have been exploring Wynn's influence on art collecting and exhibition practices locally and globally. This body of research roughly breaks down thematically and chronologically in the following way. Based around both Wynn's shifting interest in art and the changing landscape of the art world. And as you can see, I've got it roughly broken down to the different projects that he was a part of, but you'll also notice that I moved through art as cultural capital, democratizing of art, the rise of curator art as experience, and globalizing art as event, as sort of in tandem moments in the shifting world of art that also align well with Wynn's own sensibilities. So it's my hope that in today's talk, I can offer some glimpses of what I learned here to help extend each of these areas of my research, and I will conclude with some closing thoughts of what my time at UNLV has taught me as I move forward with this project. And as you watch, you can see that I'm going to have sort of markers in the bottom to help you follow where I am in my talk. So to begin with the business model of SteveWynn, at the core of my project are questions of how and to what ends Wynn is using art and capitalizing on current art world conditions to create a successful business model. An essential component in Wynn's Las Vegas venture was the introduction of the fine arts to the masses, as I've said, with the aim of redefining the culture of Las Vegas for the 21st century. Indeed, the desire to trade in the symbolic capital around which art world operates is perhaps the guiding principle of Wynn's entire business model. As I learned through my research here, Wynn was not the first to think about art's powerful role for the Vegas consumer. Wynn, in an interview focusing on Jay Sarno, creator of Caesar's Palace, states emphatically if anyone changed Las Vegas, it was Sarno, and compares the scale and structural elements of Caesar's Palace to Renaissance art, describing how people did not see artistic ability and vision of Jay Sarno, comparing him to Disney and Spielberg, those people that create places, as Wynn describes them. In another interview with Elaine Wynn, she reinforces this view and says that the Mirage, Treasure Island, Bellagio, SteveWynn, she says, gives all credit to Sarno for anything creative in Vegas. So while art was the centerpiece of Wynn's rebranding exercise, it was an idea born through close observation of how places like Caesar's Palace could become potent aesthetic spaces, worlds unto themselves, and universally appealing. In a 1997 Charlie Rose interview, Wynn expanded more on how art specifically activated the collective imagination, saying the following, quote, "I think of the relationship of fine arts to the psyche of the citizens of the world today, and I'm convinced that it is not an esoteric, affected kind of thing for the very few who are dilettantes that go to museums. I think that fine arts have a powerful bedrock kind of appeal," end quote. Interestingly, Wynn makes direct reference to urban culture in the same interview, stating how the complexities of urban life are rolling over all of us, and suggesting how art can awaken and revive another part of the collective perception. Wynn's larger vision was to construct special spaces of interaction, public and private, where people could engage and commune more directly with art. In this profound sense, Wynn also recognized that art served as an important component of cultural capital, a term developed and popularized by 20th century French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. Cultural capital and the accumulation of knowledge, behaviors, and skills that one can tap into demonstrate one's cultural competence and thus one's social status or standing in society. In many of the interviews I looked at while here, I was struck how Wynn envisioned the aspirations of his imagined hotel guests and his desire to spark their imaginations through spatial aesthetics. As interior designer Lee Cagley explained in an oral interview around Wynn's vision, he said, quote, "Las Vegas operates on the idea that there's a possibility that I could be richer, with permission to misbehave or be someone else, or try on an alternative lifestyle. Interior design is a way to make people feel valued and valuable, using principles of Baroque movement and casino design, lots of people moving through big spaces, moving as if they were part of a procession that they could be included in." Or as architect Paul Steelman described, Wynn knew that the exteriors will get you in the door once, but the interiors will keep you coming back again and again and again. As I've come to understand, this intoxicating blend of art, spatial aesthetics, and accessible connoisseurship drove the creative network of architects, designers, engineers, and other creatives who would eventually build two resort casinos, the Mirage and Bellagio, that would forever change the landscape and spatial imaginary of the Vegas Strip moving forward. For Wynn, possessing the symbolic capital of these two hotels not only meant having the power to consecrate works of art in his private collection, but also to do so through his claim to be an art patron first and foremost, proclaiming love of art and a desire to share that passion with the public over any financial concern. At an early preview exhibition of Wynn's collection at the Desert Inn, before the renovations on the Bellagio were complete, Wynn proclaimed, quote, "Nobody owns these paintings. You have custody. The pictures are bigger than we are, and we're simply the guardians," end quote. Through the renovations of the Mirage and Bellagio, Wynn also upended the associations of the fake, low-market, and tacky Sin City Vegas with the lure of authenticity and luxury promised by a fine art and attention to visual design. Tapping into the powerful, dynamic theorist Theodore Adorno has ascribed to the parallel between the masses' reaction to art and their relation to real consumer goods, Wynn instinctively understood how consumption could become vicarious enjoyment of prestige, even if fleeting and temporary, tapping into a desire to keep up with the Joneses. Architect Joel Bergman put it this way in his interview, quote, "Wynn still has hosts at a lower level than other places. People want to feel special. Whether I come to Las Vegas with $100 or $5,000, I want to feel special. I want to be catered to. People that come to this town, they want to believe that whatever they have and whatever they do, it is the best," end quote. From the beginning of the renovations, the Mirage, but especially the Bellagio, were designed to extend this vicarious and decidedly democratic consumption of art, merging Wynn's private art collection with the interior design of the hotel's public spaces. From the Picasso restaurant featuring an array of original canvases to the intricate glass sculptures commissioned for the lobby and public rooms decorated in color schemes matching Wynn's favorite paintings in his private collection, there is an uncompromising attention to aesthetic and design detail, all overseen by Wynn himself. The focus moves seamlessly from public to private space, where the aesthetic experience of the public spaces extends into the intimate settings of guest rooms. Wynn's obsessive attention to detail, even at the expense of losing money, which he and many interviewees claim he had done to get the spaces he wanted just right, appears to set him apart as a broker of fine taste in the name of art. At the same time, however, the motivation to legitimize and leverage the value of his own art collection has played a decisive role in Wynn's business model. As I have learned, Wynn took full advantage of one, the tax breaks that would help him build his art collection through shareholders' money, and two, the increased value he could amass for his collection through traditional art exhibition. A step towards building this legitimacy was the creation of the Bellagio Gallery of Fine Art. Opened in 1998 and overseen by art historian and curator Libby Lumpkin, a former UNLV art history professor, the gallery was designed to share Wynn's collection with the public and partner with other art institutions to mount exhibitions. Operating in an accessible location within the hotel, the gallery became the very first place dedicated to exhibition of fine art in a Vegas casino, attracting entirely new audiences to modern and contemporary art while operating within the traditional framework of an art institution. This desire to get things just right extended to the extraordinary efforts Wynn and Lumpkin went to when planning the exhibition catalogs for the Bellagio. Examining one of the copies in the special collection, I was struck by both the high quality of the book. Wynn here used the same expensive paper stock and Italian publisher, the same paper stock and the Italian publisher that Sotheby's and the Museum of Modern Art used in their catalogs. And I read many sort of back and forth discussions about how expensive this was to do and seemingly needless, right? But he wanted to do it. And here, more importantly, the who's who of serious academics, art historians, specialists that I studied in grad school made up the bulk of those that were actually commissioned to write for the catalog. So for me, this is quite a stunning thing to see. Featured writers of the essays, in fact, were some of the who's who of academia in their time, of studying in the 19th and 20th century. At every level, Wynn, therefore, was attempting to emulate what the best art institutions in the world were doing and offer it up to a new audience. But within a few years, in 2001, the Guggenheim would open a Rem Koolhaas-designed satellite museum on the Strip, located prominently at the recently opened Venetian, and by the early 2000s, the Bellagio emerged as the premier destination hotel Wynn had dreamt of, even as he was just on the eve of losing the hotel to the MGM takeover. The hotel even made a special cameo in the 2001 film Ocean's 11, where Julia Roberts plays Tess Ocean, the fictional head curator of the Bellagio Museum, further cementing associations of fine art and Wynn's hotel in the public imagination. Here, the rise of the curator at the same moment in the art world cannot go unnoticed. As focus shifted increasingly to the growth of the curatorial profession in the late 90s into the 2000s, changes in how we think about exhibitions and what institutions can be were also transforming. The spectacle of record prices in the art market also drew increasing public attention and interest as the internet helped make public and circulate the outcome of art auctions for private collections, another form of spectacle in the art world. One of the most striking comparisons I made while researching the art catalogs assembled by Libby Lumpkin was how different they appeared in both tone and appearance, reflecting huge shifts that were also underfoot in the art world. For example, in the catalog she created for the short-lived Las Vegas Museum of Art, an institution she helped run after leaving the Bellagio Gallery, we can see a complete shift towards the interests of the private art collector in a show curated exclusively by her and a catalog that does not call on other art experts for critical reflection. As she concedes in the intro the following, quote, "The arrival of private collections is a healthy sign for any city wishing to see a change in its cultural climate. Despite the fact that artworks held by private individuals generally are not available for public viewing, the enthusiasm of collectors ultimately seeps into all corners of civic life. Already the effects can be seen in the public realm in Las Vegas. Many of Las Vegas's most important collectors are involved with the resorts that are, or soon will be, featuring prominent displays and important works of contemporary art as attractions. And they have been influential in the development of the new buildings designed by internationally recognized architects that are going up around town," end quote. Here, of course, she was speaking directly about Wynn, who notably became far more involved in the organization and curation of his collection by the mid to late 2000s, depending less and less on traditional legitimizing forces like gallery exhibitions or consultations with art experts or art historians to grow his collection. Instead, he made the shift towards branding his own name and trading on his growing celebrity as a high-profile art collector to promote his new hotel venture, an attempt to purchase the most expensive works of art at auction to bring back and display at his properties. This evolution began with the construction of his next hotel, a property that was to be named after Wynn's most prized art object, Picasso's Le Rêve, the Dream. And this was also the painting that he famously elbowed and caused quite a bit of controversy in the art press, bringing him even more publicity. And one of the things I found is that Wynn is constantly being talked about by the interviewees as touching the art, as sort of grabbing things, taking them out of the frame. He always wants to sort of be in possession and in command of the art objects, which I found very fascinating. But the name, of course, Le Rêve, was changed in the course of the branding exercise to his own name, Wynn. And as the new hotel opened its doors in 2005, Wynn turned to a form of luxury and lifestyle branding that intensified and more firmly integrated his art collection into the design and decor of the rooms and public spaces of the Wynn and later the Wynn Encore. At the core of these efforts was less the use of art to evoke accessible connoisseurship and more of a focus on art as experience or feeling, and something inching closer to exclusivity and more private engagement or the creation of what were termed micro-environments. Here, it has been a revelation to read the oral interviews of Roger Thomas, the lead interior designer of the Bellagio, the Wynn, and the Encore, and someone who has used the word evocatexture to language what is often impossible to put into words when executing the Wynn design philosophy, and almost impossible to picture for you here as well. It's very difficult to show it. But in reading many of the interviews, Thomas describes it as moments of experimental or experiential emotion that result in a memory so captivating and so unique that if you want to repeat that, you have to come back. In terms of art and design, specifically in the Wynn and the Encore, Thomas talks of symmetry and classic proportions and how that makes people feel. We all want to feel a little more powerful, a little more elevated, a better version of ourselves when we walk into a new experience, especially one we are paying for, and I hope that's what we provide. This extends to gaming and the way the player shifts their consciousness. Let's not make it a table, Thomas explains of the mindset, let's make it your table. And as many of the architects and designers echo in Thomas's own account, the emphasis on experience, feelings, and ownership in a space, conceived with an artist's vision and influence, is paramount. As Lee Cadley sums up, recalling Wynn's directives when explaining his philosophy, and this was explained by a number of the people being interviewed, he would say, okay, I walk in the door, how do I feel? It's not what do I see, but then I walk 10 steps further, now how do I feel? What do I see? Not what do I see. And of course, we know that Wynn was losing his eyesight during the time of the construction of these hotels, so for him, the sensorium was incredibly important, feelings, experiences of spatial aesthetics. Ironically enough, the goal of art as experience follows closely to the phenomena of contemporary art's dematerialization in recent decades, where space, affect, embodiment, and relational aesthetics take a central focus in art production and exhibition. This particular topic is a very big part of what I discuss, and I didn't want to sort of bore people with too much of this, but it's incredibly interesting to me as I travel to the biennales and various art events to see how much spatial aesthetics has overtaken the role of objects in art production. And if we look, for example, at the pavilions, they are almost entirely emptied of art objects and made into environments or overtaken by elaborate installation and platforms for performance and experience. It is not about art objects, it is all about art experiences. And I would argue here that there are striking parallels to note that signal commingling interests in very similar discourses around the state of contemporary art. So moving forward, during the same period of the twin hotel projects in Vegas, Wynn attempted to replicate his Las Vegas hotel casino model with the construction of nearly identical Wynn and Encore hotels in Macau, the Las Vegas of China. This appealed to new money in the wake of the economic downturn in the United States, parallels similar trends in the art world to grow the global art market and audience for art in emerging economies around the world. Most recently, in 2016, Wynn debuted the much-anticipated Wynn Palace, also in Macau, that boasts perhaps the most extravagant and art-intensive interior of all of his properties, with over $150 million worth of Wynn's art collection on full public display. Having perfected marketing to the his hotels to the aspirational class of North American consumers, his Macau hotels are targeted squarely at the growing middle class of Chinese consumers who are likewise looking for a kind of cultural capital or embodied habitus in a Wynn-branded hotel. And as with all of his past hotel projects, the interior design and aesthetic sensibility of both public and private rooms take their design cues directly from Wynn and from the signature art pieces adorning the hotel. Meanwhile, back in Las Vegas, the past decade has been associated with renewed focus on the emerging millennial consumer, an audience interested even more so in microenvironments, areas of exclusive interaction, and spaces that feel unique and non-traditional. From the daytime beach clubs and remodeled gaming areas to include more intimate environments, to the creation of what landscape architect Julie Brinkerhoff-Jacobs describes as beautiful destinations within destinations. It is catering to a younger clientele that, as Thomas explains, wants peer group interactions and access to live events and authenticity, not screen-based interactions that they are more used to. In the art world, there is a parallel in how the growing art market bubble of the mid to late 2000s drove interest in art fairs as exclusive destination events, along with the increase in blockbuster art shows all over the world, featuring popular and bankable artists at an additional ticket price. And I'm sure many of you have noticed as you travel around the world that you will always encounter these sort of extra special blockbuster events in museums that you have to pay extra money to go see. And this is exactly part of this sort of exclusive pricing within art institutions. This, together with the spectacle of art marketing, framing art as a luxury good available for browsing, consumption, and pleasure, but mostly priced outside the ownership of everyday people, is also part of these trends. In both cases, people are willing to pay top dollar to live an experience of exclusivity and access, if only to be able to share that same experience via social media. So to conclude, some of the questions that I raise here that have to do with my opening question, in researching and reflecting on Wynn, his art collection, design philosophy, and the goal of bringing fine art to the everyday person over the past 2 weeks, I have finally arrived at an almost complete inversion of my original research question. Instead of asking what role art has played in rebranding Vegas, I'm thinking more and more about what role Vegas, Wynn, and the network of artists, architects, designers, and creatives that manifested his vision have played in rebranding the art experience. And while this is a controversial proposition for many who work in my field, I remain convinced that the production and circulation of meaning around art is profoundly transformed by Wynn's business model, and we must all pay careful attention. In a nutshell, Vegas, via Wynn's vision, has led to a more democratized access to art exhibition and across a far broader audience. Art has been utilized in public exhibition to be accessible, personalized, experienced, spatialized, interactive, and placed in non-traditional places and spaces. Ironically enough, it is precisely this model of art production and exhibition that is driving the renewal and rebranding of many of the world's top art institutions and public art programs as they scramble to retain and expand their audiences. Look no further than the current remodeling of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, a project that is expected to transform the traditional museum space to one that embraces new modalities, visions, and possibilities to experience art. Lots of talk of microenvironments here as well. This underscores art critic Arthur Danto's thesis in After the End of Art, where he states, quote, "What we see today is an art which seeks a more immediate contact with people than the museum makes possible. And the museum, in turn, is striving to accommodate the immense pressures that are imposed on it from within and outside art," end quote. Danto goes on to identify a triple transformation underway in the making of art, in the institutions of art, and in the audience for art. Indeed, there is a loaded symbolism present in the Wynn Casino hotels where infinite invisible wealth via public art and immersive art environments presents an illusion of ease, accessibility, and vicarious consumption for all. Critically, however, the reality of inevitable losses on the casino floor, the profit-making mechanism of all forms of gambling that concentrates wealth to the house, remain abstracted and go largely invisible to the public. In an ironic twist, the democratization of art that Wynn promises, the goal we could arguably ascribe to many avant-garde movements from the 1960s onwards, has resulted today in an art world and art market defined by the global 1%. Wynn's business model and collecting philosophy also reflect this reality. And so the questions arise, and I pose to you, are we heading towards a bankable future of name brand artists and art history that are determined by populist art market and collector appeal? Or will artists, galleries, museums, curators, art critics, and practitioners of art history see this as a decisive moment to shape and transform, to give way and become open to new models of how art can coexist with market and commercial forces? And how significantly is the public and art world today determined by a whole new set of configurations of spatial and aesthetic relationships that we are only now beginning to apprehend? relationships first founded in this city that have for too long flown under the radar of serious art historical study. Returning to Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown's aptly titled Learning from Las Vegas, it appears the topography of power is radically shifting, and there are still indeed many lessons to be learned from this important city. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. That was both brilliant and provocative. And we have time for questions, which I hope there will be some. If you have a question, I'm going to hand you the microphone because we are recording this. So, Professor Tracy.
With your fresh eyes being here for 2 weeks approximately, I've lived here 35 years. I've seen Las Vegas go from a city where food was buffets and the primary lure of the destination was gaming to a very, very diverse destination today. Do you see any one area like gaming, art, culinary, entertainment? Do you see anything predominating now for the future, or is it all equal in your opinion?
Well, thank you for the question, Bob. And I think we had a really good conversation when we first met, where I think you nailed it when you said that what's happening to the city is it's becoming a global sort of destination, right? And I think that with that comes the demands of what the audience expect. And in reading the interviews, one of the things that I found most interesting, and I didn't have time to talk about it in this paper, is what the future architects that have now taken up and are moving forward with the design, the architecture, the space management of Vegas are talking about. And it seems to be foregrounding all of the sorts of things that I end off with. This is the idea of a complete intensification of the art programs that are here, an interest in drawing more audiences to Vegas that have never been here. And also this idea that now, I think, 70% of revenues in the city are now non-gaming related. So this was talked about by some as a kind of fear, and by others as an opportunity. And so I think that, we really are, you are, in Vegas at a crossroads where things will change quite a bit more. Whether or not that dilutes the character of Vegas as a gaming city, who knows? But it will certainly... It certainly says something that there's so much more gaming now in other parts of the US, for example, and in other parts of the world, that the Vegas model has been exported, and now Vegas is almost sort of now importing a kind of different urban model for itself, if that kind of makes sense. So it's almost like there's a kind of interchange happening, and Vegas may lose some of its unique identity as a result, maybe. I don't want to make predictions, but yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. In your question, what role does Vegas play in rebranding the art experience? Is Vegas referencing the entire city, or what locals would refer to as like all of the valley? Not getting nitpicky about where the city, whole county, or is Vegas in the question meant to signify the resorts, the integrated resort on the Strip?
I should have put Vegas in scare quotes, and I totally appreciate your question because I know that, of course, one of the things that's really struck me being here for 2 weeks, first of all, people are fascinated when I tell them that I'm here for 2 weeks. They're like, what are you doing here for 2 weeks? Most people come here for, 2 or 3 nights. They have an experience, and one of the things that I've been able to do is drive around different communities and get to experience the city. So, and I feel for the local people that probably do get this idea that Vegas is only the Strip. To answer this question, yes, the idea of Vegas is what I'm talking about, or what has happened on the Strip in terms of how the sensations, the attractions have been posited to viewers. I'm still very convinced that the artistic sensibility of those that design these spaces, one of the things that holds Wynn apart, or Wynn's designers apart, from others that I've looked at, is that they really were told to do whatever it takes to achieve the vision. And that, of course, is closer to a kind of art sensibility than anything that you would see in a corporate model. So something about allowing there to be as much necessary to create the effect that one wants for the artist is sort of what I'm talking about. And I think that this has, of course, positive and maybe negative connotations, but It really is about how can we create an out-of-the-box art experience that is not seen in the museums, for example, of this nation. And museums are paying attention because, of course, they're also now realizing that there's a way in which to make a microenvironment also critically interesting. It doesn't have to be only about the flash of Vegas. And I would suggest that the flash of Vegas is actually a very sort of spot on for those that are sort of interested in postmodernism. And I mean, Koons is someone that's hated by so many. I think is quite fascinating and understands a lot more about society than we give him credit for. And so it's really about opening up the potential for out-of-the-box thinking. Yeah.
Thank you for your research and your evaluation. I wonder what your feeling is regarding the fact that the Guggenheim museums closed because of lack of interest, both on the part of the local community and the tourist community. The fact that there's never been a major art expo in Las Vegas, and how the concentration of wealth and marketing for people's leisure time negates opportunities within the broader community to have any kind of grassroots cultural enterprise.
I would tell you that is not a Las Vegas problem. That is a problem in most art cities around the world now. And I think that Guggenheim came here early. And Guggenheim attempted to do something that was replicating the Bellagio model. And I feel that if they would have tried, and I spent actually quite a bit of my time here really talking to the people that are a part of the local art community. I wanted to really get an assessment. What is the contemporary art scene here? What is happening grassroots? Are there pop-up exhibitions? What are the art students doing? How are they getting together? And I did hear of a couple of interesting ventures, the MGM PS exhibitions, the coming together there of those institutions and sort of temporary, exhibitions. But you're right, there hasn't been a kind of wholesale attempt, I think, to create that kind of long-standing art institution or event that needs to sort of ground this city. I understand that you have a new museum coming here, and I understand this was all, relayed to me very early this year. And it is my hope that having studied some of the failures that have been here, I think that the art collectors, those that really sort of understand what is at stake and the value of their collections, will understand that they need to support, and they have to support these local institutions if they want to continue to also gain leverage and value for their art collection. It's not always that way. I come from Vancouver, a city that is now inundated by collectors trying to create private institutions. In Canada, 90% of our cultural institutions are publicly funded. So as an art historian, one of my difficult roles has been, how do I sort of go over to the dark side and talk to the collectors? I mean, part of my job has actually been becoming invested in the art market, studying it. And I think that there needs to be a better relationship between the academic community, between the collecting community, and between the art institutions. And that's difficult because we're talking about interests and egos and ambitions that collide. And so part of this work is about how do we open up those channels of communication. Yeah.
So do you agree that the concentration of wealth in the collectors and in the global art market and the branding of name brand, investable, blue chip artists is ultimately edging out the opportunities for broader grassroots development of visual artists?
I don't want to say yes or no because I think it's too easy to say yes it is. I would say that there are opportunities and differences. One of the things that's interesting on the ground here is studying the distinctions between, say, what the Wynn Art program was, what's happening with MGM, what the, I wrote it down, Freitas brothers are doing at the Palms, and Fertitta, yes. Side note, I was promised a tour of the Damien Hirst suite, and I think they got wind of what I'm doing, and they haven't returned my calls, and I was trying to get up there. I'm actually staying at the Palms place next door. Well, and no one will ever stay there. I mean, the whole thing is about the spectacle of that space. There are models where collectors are reaching out, and one of the things that I've been trying to do as someone that's helping also people build collections, and I've worked with large collectors in Vancouver, is to get them interested in investing in young artists, emerging artists, and also putting money and resources behind backing programs, usually scholarships, foundations, art programs to help essentially extend their reach in that kind of way. So it's inevitable that these blue chip dealings are going to continue because that's what's driving this crazy art market. But I think that there is an opportunity to reach out to collectors and not slam the door in their face, which has happened with a lot of, I think, academic institutions and collectors, a lot of eye rolling around the big collectors, right? And then they, of course, fear the kind of elitism of an art historian or someone trained as a curator, right? So, yeah, brokering those conversations is part of what I would hope I want to be able to do in the future, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people think it's crazy that I'm now working in art appraising and art collecting as an art historian. I've talked to my dean about it, and I've let them know I'm very transparent about what I'm doing, but it is really seen as a taboo thing. Business and professional development and the art market is generally not taught in art schools to young artists, and I think that's a huge error. I think art students need to learn about this market.
Any other questions? Yes.
There's a curious, almost love-hate relationship in Vegas with regards to Starchitects, for example, versus named artists. For example, when City Center was being built, one of the prized architects was Norman Foster, British architect, Pritzker Prize winner. The building doesn't exist because of, basically what I'm hearing is value engineering contractors saying I can build it, the 47 stories, I can build it this way, and it turns out it didn't pass inspection, so they had to take it down. So we have a black eye for Norman Foster. Do you see casinos, corporate entities, do you see them doing that to art? With, giving us another black eye, or do you see their sensitivities being more aesthetically driven as opposed to the bean counters?
Well, and I'm very careful in what I say about Wynn because I realize that, of course, I didn't mention the elephant in the room, which is, of course, now that he's no longer part of Wynn, he's been divested. The entire scandal around what happened to him, I think, is signaling the end of an era. I have to stress how exceptional Wynn and the vision around the design philosophy was to do things at any cost. And one of the things that I've noted in the interviews, but also in conversations with people, is that how the hotels that he no longer is a part of, almost immediately the first thing that gets sacrificed is the upkeep of the art and the upkeep of all of the special features that make the experience of that place Wynn level, right? He's eccentric, he's a bit crazed, but he also had a vision that was driven and also influenced by artistic notions, right? And so one of the things that I was looking in the discourse analysis is that the way that he speaks, Roger Thomas, especially those two together, they do speak completely as artists that are creating the most incredible installation, and they're going to do whatever it takes. I don't think that that exists or is going to exist in that same way probably ever again in this city. I don't know. I'm hoping maybe. I've been reading about a couple of the proteges that they've hired, but they've already run into problems with the bean counters, right? So I'm not hopeful in that regard. I'm not, unless there's an understanding that there can be more dialogue or influence from the role of the art community. But again, this is all utopian thinking. So I think there is an end of the era, but his influence has been felt, or the influence of the design philosophy has extended to art-based hotel, art-based hotel programs around the world. And mostly what I'm seeing is the influence in interior design and microenvironments in art institutions. So I continue to see that as a kind of an effect. How much we actually want to say that that's caused by Vegas, I don't know. But everybody that I've presented this information to tends to see that there's something in it, because what's going on in the biennales and with the event-based way that art programs are now being run by big art institutions, it has such a deep parallel to what's happening here, or what has happened here. Yeah. That's a very convoluted way of saying probably not.
Anything else? I would just sort of ask one last, to go back to Robert Venturi and learning from Las Vegas. One can speculate Robert Venturi meeting Steve Wynn.
Oh, yeah.
Robert Venturi, who celebrated what, parking lots, AMP grocery stores, the decorated shed. What would he have thought of Steve Wynn's design for the city?
I think that he would have recognized the vision as an artistic one, and I think that that the mundane and banal aspects of Vegas, which he celebrated, he would probably be curious to see how and why Wynn would be doing what he was doing, right? I mean, he probably would try and talk him out of doing too much more of it. But the thing is, Venturi was also here as a tourist visiting and seeing the place, you know, with a particular kind of lens. And I think that Wynn really wanted to do something for people in terms of having them experience and see different possibilities for themselves, which is a very different kind of thing than what Venturi was doing. I think they're both spatial aesthetic engineers, and I think that's where they would probably have a lot of interesting conversations. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Last chance? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. And please keep in mind our next fellow, which I believe will be May 31st.